A missing painting, a past trauma, and an ever-growing trail of blood. Released in 1975, writer-director Dario Argento's Profondo Rosso, or Deep Red, follows musician Marcus Daly as he's sucked into the trail of a killer after witnessing the murder of a psychic. As the killer creates a cycle of brutal death in Italy, Marcus and reporter Gianna Brezzi work to understand the motive of the murderer in hopes of stopping them before they can kill Marcus. A series of half-finished clues and murders propelled by a terrible secret push Marcus and a voyeuristic audience perspective toward the truth until the mystery is unraveled in a deep red pool of blood. The giallo subgenre of horror specifically refers to a series of Italian mystery thrillers that saw the heights of their popularity during the 1970s. Originally, these films were specifically adaptations of Italian crime fiction novels known for their eye-catching yellow covers, giallo being Italian for yellow. But as the years progressed, it was director Mario Bava who solidified the giallo subgenre in the 60s with films like The Girl Who Knew Too Much and Blood and Black Lace. But it was Dario Argento who brought giallo into major commercial success through his debut film The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and quick follow-ups Cat o' Nine Tails and Four Flies on Grey Velvet. Argento's style had helped redefine the giallo, and in the wake of his phenomenal success, the giallo became a phenomena. In its heyday from 1971 through 1975, nearly 100 different gialli were made in Italy, an international precursor of the slasher mania that would run rampant in the United States during the first half of the 80s. But despite the great success it had brought him, it was clear that Argento didn't want to simply make stock standard gialli. His 1973 film, The 5 Days, is a historical dramedy, showing the director trying to quickly move away from the subgenre that brought him fame. But the poor performance of The 5 Days would bring him back to giallo for a film that would seem to be his final bow, and a success that marked the end of the giallo craze. It would be Argento's ultimate giallo, Deep Red. What makes a giallo a giallo? Besides its roots in pulpy Italian murder mysteries, certain plot elements are hallmarks of the subgenre. Of course, there's always a killer, typically wearing black gloves and never seen until the final reveal. The hero is often a foreigner, coming to Italy, France, or another European country for something completely unrelated to the killing, and sucked into the mystery due to witnessing a murder or being targeted by the mysterious killer. Psychological trauma plays a huge role, often the cause of the killer's violence and experienced by the protagonists, leaving them mentally scarred by the experience. Structurally, the giallo is a whodunit, keeping the mystery element in place instead of being a pure horror story. Stylistically, gialli are known for their bravado camera work, hyper-colored aesthetics, and cinematography designed to enhance the terror of the world that's been made. And, of course, there's the kills. As the giallo rose to prominence, Bava, Argento, and their contemporaries pushed into more elaborate and gruesome kill set pieces, as victims are stalked and slashed by an unseen terror. And the term set piece is key here, as these films often noticeably click into a different pace and style as the killer arrives. The shock and terror of when the kill will come, and how the filmmakers will misdirect and surprise audiences for the greatest suspense possible, is often the main reason for these films. Oh, and there's gotta be a bottle of J&B. What makes Deep Red Argento's ultimate giallo is that it contains all of these elements, sharpening them to the best of the director's skills while remaining unpredictable. A vicious killer given life by brilliant long takes, a fallible hero whose musicianship can't save him, momentary hints at a traumatic past that has led to all this death, an actually really strong mystery that creates a better narrative than most of Argento's work, stylish camera work that creates palpable tension as death closes in, and some of the best set pieces in 70s horror. And look, there's the J&B. Best of all, Deep Red still has that vintage Argento strangeness, surreality both by design and accident that makes its voyeuristic nature even more alluring. The unique appeal of Argento's work, and a lot of Italian horror of the time, is its otherworldly feel. It's a strange combination of how Argento, cinematographer Luigi Cuvalier, and editor Franco Fraticelli purposefully shoot and pace a movie like Deep Red, and also the inadvertent side effects of some pretty stiff acting, and a plot that abruptly stops and starts and fits, jumping from brutal kills to inessential moments of levity. In Argento's best movies, it's a feature, not a bug. and in later films, the balance is thrown off for diminishing returns. Like the majority of Italian films of the time, Deep Red is entirely dubbed in post, with actors speaking in their native dialect and then dubbed into the appropriate language for release. This means that even when Italian actors are speaking Italian, something seems off.
Riusciva a leggere I pensieri della gente.
Oh, ma senti, è bello.
Visually, the world of Deep Red is heightened modernity, surrounding characters with a towering loneliness filled with color. And except for that final, iconic puddle, the blood of Deep Red isn't all that deep red. It's more of a painty pink and pretty fake looking. But when couched in the brightly colored world around it, Argento's pasty blood fits right in. This is not a film aimed at realism. It's a film meant to shock and awe in its violence when it isn't luring you in with its twisty mystery. And shock and awe Deep Red most definitely does. Consider the way Argento films his kills. Each set piece, of course, begins with Goblin absolutely rocking out to let the audience know the killer is on the loose. And as a side note, this would be Goblin's first movie score, replacing composer Giorgio Gaslini with one day to write the score and one day to record it, and being met with sudden success that made their careers. As Argento puts us in the killer's perspective, we see gloved hands ruminating over a series of totemic objects in a long, continuous shot. And while we're occasionally placed back in that perspective as the killer closes in, we're mostly tied to quiet, patient shots of soon-to-be victims on alert. The wait builds tension. Critical tension that builds and builds until the killer strikes. And when they do, Argento uses a series of close-ups that focus on each violent impact. The result is unflinching brutality, but we're removed from the humanity of it all. In my eyes, this montage of death becomes more artistic than the gruesome kills of later slashers, which would attempt to show strange new methods of murder in full frame to shock audiences and one-up their contemporaries. The actual means of murder in a giallo are not all that unique, typically just a few stabs and hacks, but it's the filmmaking techniques that have these moments of violence become true art. Naturally, by featuring knife-wielding killers and an emphasis on brutal kills, the giallo subgenre of horror has a lot in common with the slasher, with some, like the original Friday the 13th or the opening to Halloween, adopting the first-person killer perspective for a sense of mystery. But Italy's giallo craze would be over by the time the slashers took over American cinema in the 80s. There are also some critical distinctions that make the giallo its own beast, and it's these that Deep Red traffics in so well. Gialli almost always center on a killer with disturbing psychological motivations revealed at the very end, unlike slashers whose legends are defined early on. And unlike the many slashers shown in all their glory to achieve an iconic look, the camera is placed in the point of view of the giallo killer for a voyeuristic approach to inevitable death. And as opposed to the group of unwitting slasher victims that often don't realize the killer is on the loose until the final girl is chosen, giallo heroes are amateur detectives working to solve the mystery from Act 1. And at the center lies a paradox. Gialli are always centered on a mystery, but really, the mystery isn't all that important. Typically, the killer isn't revealed until the very end, as the many strange clues doled out to hero and audience are suddenly brought together. But it isn't long until the killer is dead and the movie is over. As a result, the mystery of the giallo is less of a satisfying element of the story and more the MacGuffin driving the plot, at least in the less well-crafted entries. We're not really here for answers after all. We're after the thrill. Deep Red's most shocking moments come in the homes of its victims, violating the safety of personal life instead of the common liminal spaces of many horror movies. But despite their personal qualities, Deep Red sets are sparse and modern, creating wide, silent spaces that echo the influence of Sergio Leone, and filled with colorful mise-en-scene that draws a straight line to Hitchcock. And much like Hitchcock's ruminations on the roles of love, sex, and death in an increasingly alienating modern world, Argento's violence is a similar disruption of modern Italy. In particular, the battle of the sexes is both metaphorical and literal here, as Marcus and Gianna are both attracted to and repelled by one another in their competing search for the truth. And a final reveal that plays off Marcus's inability to recognize the strength of women. The giallo subgenre, and Argento's work in particular, has received criticism over the years for its perceived misogyny, with detractors aiming at the director's penchant for having women be the primary targets of his killers over the years. But it's this alignment between the male filmmaking perspective and the male character's perspective that's actually critiqued in Deep Red. Marcus has some obviously sexist beliefs throughout the film, telling Gianna that men and women are simply not equal, and often frustrated by her ability to match him both physically and mentally. But the biggest critique of Marcus's limited worldview comes in the finale as, and spoilers here for the film's final reveal, the killer is revealed to be Martha, mother of Marcus's friend Carlo. After directing 4 giallos in 6 years to great success in Italy and abroad, Argento would shift into the next phase of his career post-Deep Red. Suspiria in 1977 would feature some giallo elements, but is a supernatural horror, with the quasi-sequel Inferno pushing even further into the supernatural, with both co-written by Dario Argento, who plays Gianna in Deep Red and was in a relationship with Argento for a decade. Still, the giallo-inspired search for answers and brutal kills from hidden figures would dominate all of Argento's filmography. Regarding his connection to the genre, Argento would later say, "Giallo has always fascinated me because of its mysteries, enigmas, the charm of the forbidden, the impossible love stories, the sensational plot twists, and a not too linear storyline." In the 1960s, when I actually started dealing with cinema, first as a journalist, then as a screenwriter, giallo was of very little interest to intellectuals. My grandma, a truly conservative woman, didn't allow me to read them, so I would sneak into the attic and do it in private. Giallo is a potpourri of references. There was a torrent of themes and thoughts that agglomerated into Italian giallo. For example, let's not forget the fierceness of the killers, the constant presence of female characters and their importance to the plot, the unreal and highly artistic settings. Moreover, there's the Italian soul that marks the stories and characters, something coming from our past, our religion, and our superstitions. Argento would return to giallo in 1982 with Tenebrae, probably the last great picture in his filmography, depending on what you think of phenomena and opera. And much like Deep Red, Tenebrae is filled with half-remembered clues, double murderer reveals, and fountains of blood. But it's Argento just past the peak of his powers, always sitting in the shadow of works like Deep Red and Suspiria. As a filmmaker, Argento is deeply influenced by Alfred Hitchcock. In Deep Red, Argento alludes to various works from Hitchcock, but the most important is in its themes of perception and obsession. It's Marcus's perception of the first murder and belief that a painting has gone missing from the scene of the crime that send him on a path of obsession. And perception plays a role in every killing, both in terms of filmmaking and in the roles of killer and victim. Frequent shots of the killer's heavily lined eye draw our attention to a detail of sight without fully seeing. And by placing us behind the eyes of a killer that we don't know, we're fed a series of clues about their identity and motive without the ability to piece it all together. And in what's probably the film's standout moment, the treachery of perception gives life to its greatest scare. Argento builds the tension as we wait for the killer to come through the open door, only for the shock to come from the corner of our eye. And once the initial scare is over, Argento redoubles the misdirection with the appearance of the actual killer. Does the doll make any sense? No. But in a film that has psychics that can actually read minds, and plot twists that circumvent logic, you just gotta roll with it. It also doesn't help that the US version cut out 22 minutes, excising all romance and levity in favor of a leaner and less bloody movie. Perception also plays a role in Deep Red's biggest twist, as Marcus's literal perception of the killing is obscured by his personal outlook. You see, it's not just Marcus wanting to know the identity of the murderer, but trying to understand how he could have seen a painting in the original crime scene that has seemingly disappeared. As clue after clue piles up, Marcus is confronted by his friend Carlo, confessing to the killings and dying in a brutal series of accidents as he flees. It's so unexpected and messed up. I love it. Marcus is all too ready to believe Carlo until he realizes that it was impossible for him to have been the killer, having been drunk and with Marcus as the killing happened. Argento frames this as a sudden realization for the hero, but anyone that was watching the movie would have realized this minutes earlier. Is it poor writing? Is it a critique of a man blinded by his own perceptions? In Argento's world, it's a little bit of both. Marcus's reinvestigation of the crime scene reveals the truth, that there was never a missing painting. It was a mirror he saw, and the true face of the killer. Argento has literally put the truth in front of us this entire time, with our perception and Marcus's being skewed by what we believe is true. It's Carlo's mother, Martha, who is the true killer, and whose murder of Carlo's father that drove her son into alcoholism and depression. As a film, Deep Red feels like the thunderous rumblings of a tormented mind breaking loose and wreaking havoc in the real world. While long stretches of Argento's film go without the influence of the killer, every inch of the frame is overtaken by madness as soon as they arrive. And as danger gets closer and closer, nowhere seems safe. Not the home, not friendships, not family. Scandals and propriety, modernity and animalistic impulse, perceptions and reality. Deep Red is the blood-soaked collision of what we want to believe and what's really happening beneath the surface. Marcus and Martha's final violent confrontation, the inverse of their previous calm and gentle discussion, shatters all of our protagonist's beliefs. Beliefs about women, about the world around him, and about the ability for anyone, including himself, to inflict shocking, terrible violence. At last, the shocking, unexplainable madness that propelled Martha has seared Marcus's soul, leaving him lost in the deep red. Thanks for watching today's video. This is my long delayed follow-up to my video on Suspiria from years ago. Covering Deep Red, or generally just more Argento in general, or even just another giallo, has been something that I've wanted to do for quite a while, so I figured why not just get to it. And as opposed to Suspiria and its focus on the supernatural, talking about Deep Red gave me the chance to discuss giallo in general, as I think it's a fascinating and very specific subgenre of horror. And while giallo has continued to influence horror in general, and very much slashers, it's a subgenre that had its heyday for a very specific period of time and has never really recaptured that glory. I'm sure that every giallo fan has their own personal favorite from the subgenre, but to me, Deep Red is a hallmark. Whether you're a longtime fan of giallo or whether you're just looking to get into it and understand what it means, Deep Red is really the complete package. So if you're not really experienced with giallo, I would highly recommend jumping into Deep Red, a lot of Argento's early films, and of course the big works of Mario Bava. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Deep Red if you've seen it, your thoughts on giallo if you're familiar with it, and any other Italian horror movies that you think that I should cover. I've thought about doing some Bava, and I've also thought about doing Fulci, specifically the Gates of Hell trilogy, because that is extremely wild and weird and there is so much to talk about there. I'd like to do that trilogy as a whole in a single video. Clearly, there's going to be a lot of horror content on the channel this year because this is already my second horror video of 2022, and I'd love to hear what other horror films you'd love to have me cover. I have a lot in mind. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons for their continued support. If you'd like to support me, it's only $1 a month for early access to every video and exclusive audio Patreon-only reviews. Until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and looking out for any suspicious black glove-wearing killers. See you again soon.